The man trickled off as Death moved his knight a single step from the White Queen. "Lust and chastity," it said. "Lust and chastity," the man responded, and looked at the board, at the Black Knight, at his queen out riding, at his king miles away with his knights hunting. "Lust and chastity," he said again. Evening was falling. The sky was clear and cool. Earlier there had been a fog all along the coast, just fog. Victus grazed her meadow. The man considered how the sun was setting higher in the sky these days. Night passed. The man made no move. The air was cool and damp. The chill had no effect on the Wraith, but the breeze drew the sand that fell back to the sea to be taken by the waves and returned. The man moved a pawn. The queen was taken. "You can have her," he said, and then continued. "It was never lust that I was interested in. I sought the connection, the fullness of complete connection. I sought that feeling. It seems I wished for something that was not for me, or I sought a replacement for that epic idea I had, and none of them could match it. Well, each had something I loved, but never more than that. It was never enough to have just one facet ground or polished. Not that I wanted facets, never was particularly interested in them. Always preferred stones to be ground smooth, like beach pebbles." "You are boring me," the Wraith said. "People love sex," the man replied, "but they aren't honest about it. They pretend chastity, well, probably not chastity, but they pretend not to love sex as much as they do. They hush it up, then periodically it gets out of hand, and you always know then that something crazy is about to happen." "Something crazy?" "Yeah, like the fall of a civilization or a major war. It's one of those things that probably has to be reined in to some extent for a society to function effectively. Think about it. The word sex connotes the actions that surround and entice copulation so that the species will reproduce. It is a pretty intense drive. It had to be intense enough that humans and their forebears had to continue to want to fuck even when everything else was fucked, right? I mean, people were fucking in caves all through ice ages. Life can't have been easy. Food must at times have been scarce, even for the most organized. Perhaps in those times, people might even turn to sex to further deny to you what they might subconsciously imagine to be your ultimate prize, the death of entire families, entire tribes, perhaps the entire species. It would all be a question of whether they could possibly manage to feed the tribe, the copulation, enough for it to live and carry on the line. Is that lust? Lust is part of what that is. It is a magnetism, not so much the magnetism between people as the field that emanates from each that will then draw a match. Clarify. Lust is the pure interest in the action and what it entails of copulation. It is the isolated drive to reproduce, as separate from any interest in the fuller context and content of reproduction. Lust may as well be a god, a shape-shifting god that infuses people and then feeds off the triggering of their desire. There can never be enough. No one occasion is ever satisfying. The desirer is quickly sapped and lust moves on. I am a man. Lust is for me female, but lust can be male or neither. She flits about in different form, relevant to the occasion. She appears in images that people create. She invests herself where she will be seen, where she can entice, where she can build her following, her power. She is the daughter of Earth, your daughter with Earth, who serves her parents both. Quite an observation, said the Wraith. Yeah, or I could say we are animals, lust is just hormones. Death watched him. Lust serves both life and death. Perhaps she is a creature of your brother. Perhaps she represents a part of him. Perhaps each of his daughters do. Sand fell. Death said, That cannot be all you have to say. Sand fell. The man said, There is so much to say regarding lust and chastity. It is easy to discard it as a topic. It is just too large, too all-consuming to even approach. Death said, Has that ever stopped you? Not usually. Well, You have hardly satisfied the topic, the man said. I can hardly satisfy the topic, but very well, I will consider it further. The man was quiet for a time. He picked up a bowl of food. It was still hot. He waited for it to cool, then took some on a fork and considered. I started out chaste, the man said, and then he was silent. Sand fell. The Wraith spoke. Does not everyone? I don't mean as a child. I mean when I took charge. That is where I started. I was no monk as a child. I was riddled with the same lust as any other. You held lust as a child? Of course. No one wants to talk about that. Children start feeling their sexuality long before they reach maturity. It is literally one of the core sensual and emotive experiences that a child contends with. It is also one of the most badly handled aspects of personal development in the society that I grew up in, at least. The man paused. No, I need to change that statement. It was insufficiently strong. It is perhaps the most badly managed aspect. I'm not saying there aren't other aspects of life and development that aren't equally powerful, but I'm not sure there are any that are more consequential. Sex, intimate interaction with others, is at the heart of everything we do in the world. Is that not too strong? You speak as a wraith. You do not understand the reality of what it is to be a creature of matter, a mammalian organism, one that is even self-aware, for fuck's sake. It is at our core. It affects our mood. It informs our self-image, how we present ourselves, the imagery we surround ourselves with, the way we make decisions, what we choose to pursue, how we see the earth, how we see God, how we see creation itself, let alone the development of that creation. Sex, reproduction, is at the essence of what it is to be a creature. Our physicality is created by it. Our minds are patterned by it. Our souls are the essence of it. There is nothing that is more engrossing, more instinctually pertinent than the child to the parent. People have to be pretty fucked up to lose touch with that particular care. It is innate. Babies' eyes captivate us with delight and an overwhelming sense of loving care, and the sound of them crying bothers us to the point of utter distraction. We are bound to them. We are so bound that even animals, those dumb creatures, will recognize a child. Some will eat them on that basis, of course, but that is not surprising. What is perhaps surprising, though, is how many animals will care for the young of other animals simply because they are young. The maternal and paternal instincts are of profound strength, and they only exist because of sex, because of the primary need, the primary importance, the most basic level of physical existence for the reproductive act, for sex. And lust is a part of that. It is the impetus, the drive that gives rise to the sex. It arrives in human life within only a few years, long before reproductive maturity. The physicality is already there, the nerve endings, the sexual organs. Yeah, the reproductive organs take longer to develop, but the cock is there, the vagina and clitoris exist, and it doesn't take long for the child to realize they exist. It also doesn't take much more than a minute for children to start playing with dolls, mimicking with the dolls their own parents. They see adults kissing. I'm not saying they put two and two together immediately, but once upon a time it wouldn't have taken long, when families still lived in a single room and parents would, as a matter of course, engage in intimacy with the entire family about. The child would be aware of the intimacy of the parents no less than they would be aware of any other aspect of their parents' lives. So, by the time the reproductive capability of the human being has developed, the child has already been taking an interest in their sexual organs for what, 7 years, 9 years? 3 fucking quarters of their lives. I'm not saying children aren't thinking about other things, and much of what children in the early years may think about may as well be subconscious because they haven't sufficiently learned any context for informed analysis, but they fucking know they've got something going on down there. They just don't know much more than that. But they don't need to. They relate it to themselves. The fact they know nothing about it only adds to the mystery and intrigue of it. And I will tell you what, there's a reason parents have to teach their children manners, because as an animal there is no innate reason not to take a far greater interest in that stuff than they do. Adults train them to consider that stuff private, to not touch themselves in public when they're 3 or 5 or whatever years old. Does it go away? Fuck no, it doesn't. The child develops an obsession with it and everything associated with it, and again, unless they've been forced trained by their parents not to. And even then the obsession doesn't go away, it just gets suppressed. And nothing like that can be suppressed forever. It's like coming up with a fiction that doesn't in fact describe reality, only to have reality catch up eventually when the gap gets too big, when it stings you with the indisputable relevance of its presence. We can fool ourselves, but nature is what nature is, and God has in mind what God has in mind. So, as a result, the dog entered maturity is a goddamn mess, let alone the human child with all the confusion of the development of increasing self-awareness and self-consciousness and all that sort of thing. But people do suppress sex and its associated lust because it is like death. It's too big to comprehend. It's terrifying in its scope and its relevance. So we play with the outlines of it, with the part of it that we allow ourselves to see. We train ourselves to be careful of it. We know its power to upset, even to destroy. How many wars have been fought for sex, for the feeding of lust? And I'm not just talking about wars in the sense of conflicts between kingdoms or whatever. I'm talking wars at every level. Wars between people, wars in the context of navigating overwhelming feelings of attraction, of supposed need, wars in competition, wars to impress, wars imparting, wars between families, wars within minds, between the voices, those of caution and those of conquest, and all of the strategy and tactics that must be decided. Just think of the literature, just think of the erotica, just think of the prostitution, just think of the bitch and heat. I mean that literally. Consider the fucking season of spring as it arises from the cold of winter. Think of the delight in offspring, in spring flowers and newest green leaves. You want to know something? What? I'll tell you. The most interesting thing. Well, again, I mean there's nothing more interesting. Anyway, one of the most interesting things about this new semi-virtual world, and it will also be one of the most interesting things about the virtual world that will supplant the semi-virtual world. Anyway, one of the most interesting things in that context is the pornography. The pornography? Yes, there's an honesty about it that is worthy of respect. You consider that world to portray honesty? Of a sort, yes, absolutely. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of acting and a whole lot of distortion in there, and a whole lot is clearly deeply unhealthy. Perhaps all of it. But leaving that aside for the moment, it is a reflection, just like a free market economy or a democracy, but even more so because it's a black market. It's a reflection of what would normally be hidden. It's a world that abhors censorship. It reflects the id of the human mind, and as such it laughs at the preposterousness of humans pretending they're anything other than apes with semi-advanced imaginations. But no, we veneer ourselves and then pretend the veneer is a reality. We pretend that the veneer isn't going to be just stripped away the moment the shit hits the fan. The Wraith spoke. Humans have pulled through conflict and devastation. The man replied, yeah, and in every case I bet you were busy, because you know what? Every single time any city in fucking history got looted by an invader, every single time someone got raped and someone got killed. How many times has that happened throughout human history and beyond to tribes and territories and all those tens, no, hundreds of thousands of years of our evolutionary development? Every single time. That is the truth of our past. Our pretense to civilization, to self-control, to the ability to govern is laughable. However, changing the parameters, some cultures have achieved more than others, thanks to your brother, and their gains should be enforced and reinforced. That is where the deification should happen, to principles, to ideas, to forms, to infinity itself in the most abstract sense. But no, we distort, we pretend we are more, while all the time reality stares us in the face and we still ignore it. How is this pertinent? Sex, and thus lust, permeates all, and yet in this society that should be beneficiary of your brother, because of its fear, because it developed so far in terror of its past, makes itself its own god and pretends it is in control. Perhaps some of it is in control. You mean like the people that push products on people but then don't allow those same products to be used in their own houses by their own children? Or the people who are so robotically disciplined that they are able to exist in environments that exist precisely because they're taking advantage of others and siphoning power and resources off for their own use? Are you getting off your topic? Probably. I just think it's weird how people pretend. You all pretend. Yeah, but where sex is concerned, it affects stuff. Where the health of the environment is concerned, it affects stuff. It is really only the sex industry that acknowledges the truth of lust, that accurately represents what sex is to people the moment that door is opened, sickening as that may be. Really, that industry should get an award for services to mankind. You think the service it provides to be that beneficial? Oh, not because it provides fodder for people's sex drives. I mean, I guess that is a service of a sort, although I personally would consider it more of a corrosive element. But no, I was saying it should get an award for services to humanity in the educational sense. I mean, people should appreciate it for accurately portraying what people actually are. And don't jump on me for suggesting that it isn't all utterly distorted. Not that you would, but many people would. I'm not saying it isn't distorted. I just don't think it's distorted in the way many people consider it to be. It is distorted because people are distorted. It is distorted because societies that are made up of distorted people are themselves distorted. People can shame the sex industry all they want, but it provides an honest service in a way. A far more honest service, in fact, than just about any other. It literally thrives on the fact that it allows people to feel like they're not being judged. So I don't blame the sex industry. It portrays what is. Blame the sex industry for what? For the distortion in people. What is to blame? What I said, the fear of the deep. Should not sex be regulated in a society? Of course it should, but honestly. We have created a situation where everyone wants to have their cake and eat it too. Sorry, I'm bored of that expression, but it keeps coming up. I mean, you can channel sexuality, lust, but you can't try to deny it. Anything that important that gets denied is going to explode. Is it exploding? Yeah, I think it is. We separate ourselves from sex just as we separate ourselves from death. We get it as far from us as possible while simultaneously clinging to it in secret. What do you mean? I mean, we are obsessed with both, but we pretend to abhor them. Are you repeating your points? Probably. I just think what you said is right. It is really a discussion of sexual morality. Like anything else, how should it be managed? What are the norms that should be set up? If something is important, if it has import, then surely it should be considered with due regard. And what can be truly considered if not considered honestly? So, like I said, I started out as a monk, chaste, celibate, well, almost. I considered it in the romantic sense. I'd already read the great romances. The Wraith cut in. How does all this inform the question of lust and chastity and their usefulness as forms? Well, why would lust be a sin? It is because of the problems it causes, but I'm not sure making it a sin is the most useful way of dealing with it. What would be better? I think people go through stages, but within the stages it is possible to lose track of the thing itself. The point must not be to deny it, but rather to channel it. Is that not what is happening? That seems an odd question for you to ask. Channeling? What the fuck channeling is going on right now? No, right now there's an uncontrolled explosion taking place of all the stuff that has been pent up. Someone opened the gates to the pens in the zoo and the animals are running wild. I'm not sure I follow. Well, what is happening in the world right now? On one front you have liberalism and on the other side you have conservatism. But is that what it should be? What about traditionalism? That isn't the same as conservatism. Conservatism is about conserving the status quo, really, because you can only act from where you are, right? And liberalism just means fucking go for it. But you've got to account for those others, those who are not only conservative, but are conservative of norms that go back further. I mean, those for whom entire overhauls of culture have simply not taken place. Entire generations of social evolution experienced elsewhere simply didn't happen for them. And I don't mean evolution as something that is to be considered automatically a good. Evolution can take place as a result of traumatic experience. It can be a response steeped in weakness. Death turned and looked at the man, and the man noticed. I understand that evolution is simply response, but in the context of social development at least, evolution is not always a positive thing, is it? I mean, circumstances can give rise to the development in a person of antisocial traits, or even dangerous traits. The person evolves as a result of their experience into a new person, the same person, but a person that is now different. The person is clearly different because in a given situation they will never choose precisely the same way again. And you know what? I'm not entirely sure the same discussion can't be had for physical traits. I mean, the further from the infinite we are, the more alienated we are from all else. The more defined our borders, the more intense and specified and stupid our existences are. So I'm not saying that the traditionalist society is necessarily worse or inferior. It might be, but it certainly isn't necessarily. And the fact is, I found myself asking recently whether sufficient attention or respect is paid to all that stuff, all the customs and behaviors and beliefs and norms and mores, and all of the stuff that seems so backwards, all the stuff we assume is backwards. I have begun to suspect that it is precisely there that a deeper wisdom might be found. I mean, at least a semblance of the sort of wisdom that exists within an old family of wolves. You are leaving loose ends. That is because you keep on interrupting me. Get on with it. I said I started off chaste, once I started choosing. I keep interrupting because you are not keeping the bargain. You have never been chaste in your life. Very well, I will put it differently. Sexuality, lust specifically, was something. I distrust it as being as of the flesh and not of the spirit. How surprisingly ordinary of you. Yeah, sickening really. The man laughed, but self-consciously. The Wraith noticed. The man continued to speak. It didn't last. I never did give up the idea of holy love, clean, wholesome, spiritually nutritious intimacy. It was just lust that I eschewed, the casual intimacy, that for the body, humping like dogs in the dust beside a road, or for the head alone. I didn't care what fancy pseudo-spiritual terms anyone wanted to apply. Tantric sex, for fuck's sake. The man laughed aloud. Whatever, it's fucking. You are coming perilously close to the first of the next two topics. The man thought for a second, as if doing something like counting on fingers. Envy? He said. The Wraith said nothing. It wasn't envy. Well, I mean, who doesn't wish to be good at something, to be able to control something enough to feel the flow of it, enough to release control? I know that feeling, and your point is taken. There are different forms of sex, and some are gross. But is it lust that is the problem? No, it isn't. It is the person that feels the lust that is a problem. Lust is like a gun in that way, or like a knife. It is a force multiplier. Lust is a weapon? I'm saying that lust is a powerful force. If a twisted person feels lust, then that person's lust is going to be twisted, and anyone who might be on their radar should probably leave the state for a little while. But to blame it on the knife, or on the gun, or on the lust is absurd. That's how ridiculous this stuff is. Lust is the expression of the force of sexuality in a person, the energy of the reproductive force, the energy of the psychology associated with the actual physical organs of sexuality. That's how the lust of some people results in tantric sex with a trusted partner. The lust is what brings the passion, and just because they aren't sweating like strays in the drainage ditch doesn't mean they aren't feeling passion. They're just controlling it, channeling it, preserving it, savoring it, like another might savor a glass of wine or a carefully prepared dish of food. In that way, sex is like anything else, and lust is the force that fuels it. The issue is not so much the representation of lust or the expression of sexuality, but whether there is care involved, whether there is actually true empathy and consideration involved. In other words, to what extent is the expression in fact psychopathic? Because that is where the issue is. That is where the harm takes place. So maybe it would make more sense to concentrate on people than on the force itself. Or is it that some culture back in the past, some city-state, allowed the force to make its way, and maybe it brought the city-state down? Maybe everyone stopped working and the place collapsed. I don't know. I'm rambling a little. I'm tired. It is the end of the 12 moon cycles, and I'm tired. I just wanted to make the point that perhaps it would make more sense to educate people more intelligently about sex than to attempt to placate our fear of it by mindlessly sanitizing it, or dangerously suppressing it, or by developing distorted ideas of it. Maybe people instead should put in a bit of work to evolve a little in their souls so that it wouldn't be such an issue. That isn't the direction we are headed, though. Right now, we have passed the role of sexual education over to the porn industry. We deny biological reality by insisting on infantilizing young adults well into what should be their most productive years. As a result, children learn nothing, and all in the name of their best interest, all in the name of the value of what is learned through play. But they've all forgotten what play must be in order to be useful, and they've written all about it, and they just don't get it. Play, like anything, should have structure. It should have purpose, understood purpose. And that purpose should be geared to mesh with a practical element, Wolves play, but is it irrelevant play? I will answer, it isn't. All of it is pertinent to the life they will live. The Wraith spoke. Should not different animals just play in the way that is natural to them? Not if what is to be natural is irrelevant or destructive or unthinking. Not if what is to be natural is in fact psychopathic or stupid. Play should be real in the sense of developing actual strengths that will be practically useful. I'm not just talking about playing to be physically strong. You know what? Play should mimic the hunt. To achieve the prey, the hunters must be strong. They must run, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. To achieve the hunt, the hunters must think. They must use the strategy that came with their blood, to interact, to work together, to shift and encircle as one. Tactically, they must consider the terrain, the environment, their position in relation to their quarry, how it will defend itself, how it will take it down. To achieve the hunt, the hunters must be focused and disciplined, enfolded in their task, fixated on their goal, the perfect hunt. Every part of the wolf is engaged. That is when the wolf is happy. That is what happiness is. Perfect alignment with perfect purpose, not perfect alignment with any purpose. The Wraith continued to challenge. Some would say the total freedom of play builds a child's mind beneficially in a way that other more guided activities do not. The man responded, yeah, no doubt that is true. Doesn't mean it's what you want. I think it makes more sense to think of the mind and the soul in much the same way as the body. With the body, it is possible to develop an exercise that has no practical correlate. And a person can get really strong in that exercise, but what the hell are they doing with it? I was watching professional arm wrestling the other day. That is a perfect example of this. What is the purpose of the investment? Yeah, you can build those muscles in that way, but why would you? What is the point of it? Any muscle group can be developed in useless ways, either strengthened needlessly or stretched to needless extents, stretched right out of the range of functional movement, and in the name of health and enlightenment and wisdom. And people just eat it up, and it probably has something to do with the fact that adults, for often an entire decade, are actually called children, or at least are treated like them, and so behave like children and still know nothing. And yet, paradoxically, they are given choices, and provided a voice that even adults, in their fever of child adulation, seem to deify and defer to. We stunt children with our own imposed stupidity. A child that grows with responsibilities in an adult environment will be an adult in behavior for all practical purposes by the time they are 7. It's not difficult to see it. You only have to go somewhere where the society doesn't have the luxury of not engaging the young in any useful way. Anyone who argues differently is full of shit. By the time a child can understand how to follow direction to clean a dish in the sink, they are entering adulthood. By the time they are actually of an age to accommodate sexuality, it would make a lot of sense if they actually were already adults in their minds and in their responsibilities. Maybe then they would understand it. Maybe then by the time they reach positions of actual influence in life, whether as a consumer or as a producer, they might produce or cause to be produced something more intelligent, more honest, more useful than the trash that people, children and adults currently consume. Your language is perhaps becoming a little expansive, is it not? Maybe. But I think it's important. I think it's even more important than I can see. It stems from a deep root. We should be wary of it. I don't mean wary of sex or lust. I mean wary of closing our eyes to them, wary of not understanding what they are, wary of getting out of touch with ourselves, wary of the distortions. Do you think traditionalism can help with that? Perhaps in some cases. Why do some cultures segregate the sexes? We think that it is backwards, but why do they do it? What did they learn? Did we evolve beyond that state? Did we surmount the attendant risks, or did we just forget about them? Should married individuals have opposite-sex friends? To what extent should a rule of chastity apply? How does it affect trust, that bedrock security that civilization, that society requires? Is the chastity enough? Or must there be the appearance of chastity? Or must there be not even the opportunity to breach chastity? And if the latter, then why? Have the former options been tried and failed? How many times? Why should women be covered head to toe? Why should women wear wigs to cover their natural hair, or visually offensive clothes to make them look ugly? In other words, clothes that utterly desexualize them. That isn't my culture. In my culture, women can look great, sexy, empowered. But is there a reason that the older cultures, the traditionalists, might frown upon that behavior, the freeing of that particular expression? Is it because so many civilizations have fallen after periods of debauchery, when they got so comfortable that they thought they could have all of what they have and behave in any way they like and not lose it? And what is the benefit of chastity? It seems to me there are two aspects to be immediately considered. First, there is the benefit to the individual, and then there is the benefit to the society. The reason chastity is considered a virtue is because it implies the individual has taken God as his lover. That is to say, he eschews the flesh for the spirit. Because he is not distracted, he may better concentrate on that which is of greater import. And that statement is not to overlook the question of distraction. The sorcerer chose chastity but remained distracted and thus grew resentful. The point is, the degree of chastity must match the reality of the needs of the spirit. Chastity requires discipline, self-control. But that means discipline and self-control must have been developed in order to achieve chastity. So, that is the individual. Intimacy, sex is full of the sensual, full of the psychological. If a person wishes to explore those, then chastity is not for him. Chastity is for the monk. It is for the nun. It is literally to take God as lover. The second aspect, the benefit to society. The chastity of the good is only a loss to society. As a matter of breeding, and we are animals after all, and anyone who has spent more than a minute thinking about evolution has to appreciate that as creatures in a shifting and challenging environment, whether we like it or not, the concept of breeding is utterly painfully relevant. The health of a society over time is completely dependent on breeding, on the breeding of bodies that are able to effectively master the physical challenges of the environment, the breeding of knowledge that helps discern information relevant to that navigation, the breeding of wisdom to make choices that help in that navigation, the breeding of systems to make efficient the interconnectedness and the interaction of the group, so that the members of the community may work more effectively together in the context of navigating as a group. All of it incorporates breeding. The only question is what guidelines are set in place that control and inform the breeding. If none, then the result is whatever comes out in the wash. If piecemeal, then it is a result of whatever balance of inputs is found. If complete, then it requires considering and promoting certain choices over others, selectivity. Obviously, there's a certain overwhelming complexity to it all, but I can't help but think that perhaps something is missed. While I can see the conceptual benefit of having a class of people who have forsworn the carnal so as to explore the divine and then teach their findings, or who implement their findings into the guidance of their social structure, if that is the idea, if that is considered the wisest path, thus taken by the wisest people, those called to the divine, those sensitive to the most subtle, the most abstract, those able to see beyond the next step. I mean, are they not the very best to procreate? Why would you want them chaste? Your argument is weak. I can see you've not even satisfied yourself. Hang on. I'm going to back up a bit and just say first of all that, in reality, the priestly class is by no means any wiser than any other, and is a little too largely populated by weak people who only turn to God because they didn't have anything else. Does that mean they were called? Is God for the misfits? God gives life to matter, to earth. How much room is there for misfits on the earth? Misfits die immediately in nature. If something doesn't fit, it dies. And that is despite the overwhelming infinite complexity of what has arisen on this planet. Being a misfit neither increases nor decreases the infinity, but lifespan, that is adjustable, as you well know, as you are the one that takes. So while the priestly class is supposed to be the wisest, those called to the highest of callings, they aren't necessarily wise at all, and perhaps it is better that many of them are chaste, but that itself is a matter of breeding, for who is brought into the monastery? I recall traveling in the Far East, where the infrastructure of deep spirituality is perhaps more obviously intact. I mean, you see more holy people out there than here. They wear bright orange robes, you can't miss them. And that is just one group among many such groups. Anyway, their idea of a monastery is an institution that is as much an orphanage as it is a college of spiritual learning. I had allowed myself to assume and ascribe a sort of supposed wisdom to them. They are monks, they live the life. But then I quickly realized they weren't monks. They were just children like any other children, just wearing orange robes because they wouldn't have food otherwise. The Wraith pressed. What does this have to do with lust and chastity? Everything. Perhaps it isn't the discussion you may have expected based on your experience of hearing of those traits in people, but it has everything to do with it. Chastity is about far more than forswearing carnal sex. It is about control. It applies to so much more than lust, and yet lust is considered antithetical to chastity. The Wraith interrupted. You have been suggesting deeper consideration of the old ways. Maybe you are needlessly confusing the matter. Not all priesthoods require chastity. True, what about that? It's probably the more sensible course. At least then the priests are expected to have some understanding of the lives of their flock through experiencing some of what the flock experiences. I mean, how is a priest supposed to be able to empathize, truly understand the worldly challenges of their flock if they in fact experience none of that? You are mixing priests and monks too closely. Monks are not expected to have anything to do with the ordinary person. They must be kept essentially in experiential quarantine, whereas the priest is expected to teach and guide the ordinary person. Is that what you mean? Yes. It is degrees of the same, obviously. None of them necessarily know any more about anything of import than anyone else. They will know about what they experience to the extent they consider it, just like anyone. The wisdom doesn't come from the occupation. The wisdom only comes if what is chosen to be taken from the occupation in fact gives rise to wisdom. I'm not saying there aren't different potentialities depending on occupation. I believe there are, despite the fact that anything can be gone into infinitely. It is just that not all infinities are equal. You are arguing two opposing points simultaneously. Make up your mind. I don't need to make up my mind. It is clear, even if I have yet to express clarity. I know what I think about it. Well, there is the hermit's path. There is the monk's path. There is the shepherd's path. The hermit is alone with nature. The monk is alone with nature and his brothers. The shepherd is alone with nature, his family, and his flock. There are degrees of it. I get it. I understand it. I've been the hermit and the monk. The only one I haven't been is a shepherd. And I understand that some must attend God in that absence of distraction. But of course, the hermit and the monk are different. The remote hermitage and the established monastery are not the same. Both are tied to nature, but the former is within nature. The hermit joins with God differently from the monk. The hermit joins with God through the animals, through the plants and the trees, through the sound of water as it falls outside his shelter. The hermit meditates within. He becomes a thinking animal. His mind is on that which gives rise to the infinite forms. The monk is different. There is a particular solemnity in the monk's world. There is a routine more tightly established. There is no one to ring a bell to wake the hermit. The sun is the bell. The temperature of the air is the bell. The dew is the bell. The monk lives in halls of stone. He seeks the silence of stone, not the silence of stream. And stone is solemn. He hears his brother's voices. He hears them within the stone. He is not removed from nature. He husbands her. He tends her. She provides for him that he may meditate on silence. The hermit never hears silence like the monk does. There is silence in the forest beside the stream, but it is a different silence. It is a silence of total manifestation. The monk's silence is the monk's voice that resounds within the stone. It is the sound of his tools as he works the soil. It is the sound of the kitchen as he makes his simple food. It is the sound of bowls and cups on wooden benches. The hermit grazes the forest. Priests must bridge the gap between the cloistered and the profane. They allow the wisdom to pass. They should be half human. Half human? They must have 1 foot in the world that people know and 1 foot in the monastery. If they don't have a foot in the world that people know, how will anyone relate to them? I've never been the priest. I never was able to keep that foot in the world people know. Anyway, that is what it is, and like I said, that is not the reality. The reality is that the hermit is insane, the monk is avoiding reality, and the priest is busy getting shuffled around until finally arrested decades later for some really fucked up abusive shit. That's the reality, and it is because they're all supposed to be chaste. What do you mean, it is because they're all supposed to be chaste? How does that follow? I'm playing loose, I'm tired, but I'm pretty sure I could bridge that gap for you if I set my mind to it. And look, don't get me wrong, I know it's not all like that, obviously it isn't, but there's a little too much of that, don't you think? I'm referring to the priests. I don't think it can be particularly controversial to say the hermits are insane and the monks are avoiding reality. If someone goes off into the woods by themselves and stays there, they will either become enlightened and disappear, or they will go insane. It really is quite as simple as that. And as regards the monks avoiding reality, well, I don't blame them. That's pretty much the way I've been living most of my life. I get it. I prefer the simple life too. But they depict different degrees of chastity. That is what I was getting at. Chastity is the denial of the comfort of the flesh. The comfort of the flesh is the satisfaction of the flesh desire. The hermit starves it. The monk feeds his labor, but he remains lean. The priest eats in the palace and gets soft and weak. That is the true measure of chastity. It is dependent on that to which a person is married. It is not about lust. The hermit is chaste through his lust for the stream. The monk is chaste through his lust for the resonance of stone. The priest is not chaste, as he at least must hear confession, and thus he is human. The man broke off for a minute, then returned. I almost forgot. Had to pull it back. I said I know what I think, that I didn't need to make up my mind. Well, that was the first part of it. The second part was a consideration of why they should be chaste at all. There is the obvious reason already discussed, the avoidance of distraction, the keeping the body and mind clean of the experience of the sensual to allow the spirit to reach the heights it might reach. But what about the cost of it? The cost presupposes belief in the substance of the institutions. In any case, to mimic nature, the strong would have to be chosen. The alphas mate and the weak do not survive. To choose man's way is to choose the clever. To choose God's way is to choose the wise. So they should be wise. Yet in the real world, there is no reason to think of monks as being any wiser than anyone else, except perhaps in the simplicity of their living, where that exists, and that might be saying something. But the thing is, many are just living that life, and were a bunch of them to get together with a bunch of nuns and reproduce, the offspring would not necessarily be any wiser than their cloister parents or anyone else. But taken as a matter of forms, then a difference might appear. Think of a noble family with sons and daughters. The daughters are married off to create ties to other families. The eldest son got the title and estate. Another son would join the clergy. Another son would join the military. Just think of all the weaving that is taking place in that circumstance. Hundreds of years of it. A veritable old-growth environment. I wonder how many people there are in the world that would protect old-growth forests while decrying precisely the same construct in the human sphere. The equivalent of a virgin forest is an aristocracy that has never been taken down. The fact is, whether people like it or not, logic dictates that breeding be taken into account. Sensitivity, the human ego, battles against it, but there is a reason nature works as it does. The man stopped speaking and gazed off for a moment in silence. Sand fell, but it was night, so the sand was quickly gone. Death said, envy and gratitude.